I was confident and sure that I could make a good product. It still does, humble me and surprise me that people supported it. I've got customers still that I've had from day one and have sort of seen the full evolution of our product list and how we've evolved the business and sort of supported us along the way. Yeah, that's just a great feeling to sort of have, people that I know and respect that have followed me and continue to support me all the way.
This is The Crackling. I'm Anthony Huckstep. A career in food may be a calling for many, but it's not until one has their hands on the pans, deliberating over harmony and balance, that they find what truly connects them to the food we eat. Chefs have so many experiences at their fingertips, a strong connection with the land and those that farm it, and the more intimate finale of guests enjoying the spoils of their labour. Within those experiences lies moments that can set anyone off in a new direction, and often one they'd never before considered. While making small goods at one of Melbourne's finest restaurants, Mick Nunn discovered his calling, and it set him on a path of discovery through Spain, France, and to his hometown of Ballarat, where he's producing some of Australia's best charcuterie. Well, Mick, how does a boy from Ballarat carve out a career as a chef, home and abroad, and end up as one of Australia's best charcuterie makers?
Yeah, well, when you put it like that, it's been a journey, really, hasn't it? Yeah, look, I mean, I grew up in Western Victoria, in Ballarat. I'm one of four boys. I've got three brothers, competitive children, as you know, one of four boys always would be. And look, I had a fairly simple Western Victorian upbringing, really, in terms of food. I'm not from a French, Italian, Spanish background, so I don't have stories of, Nonna teaching me how to make pasta or dishes that have been in the family for heaven knows how long. It's purely come from my own interest and love of food that I've sort of entered into it, and I I did when I was a kid. I did in sort of year 10. They place you to put to go and do things, work experience, and I went to a restaurant and I only needed a day in there and sort of fell in love with the buzz of it, and that's kind of how it started for me. I finished high school and then I was straight in the kitchen 2 weeks after I'd finished year 12. So yeah.
Well, tell us a bit about your career as a chef. I mean, we'll get to the charcuterie side of things and what you've achieved there. But tell us a bit about your career as a chef and some of the main influences.
Yeah, I've been lucky to have some great mentors along the way. So when I first, decided I wanted to be a chef, I had a family friend by the name of John Dench, who's actually got Dench Bakers in Ballarat, in Melbourne now, and he was a chef at the time and took me on as an apprentice. I considered staying at home. I was only 17 when I finished high school, but John sort of said, you need to come to Melbourne to try and ply this trade, because at the time there wasn't a hell of a lot in Ballarat, in terms of high-end restaurants or anything like that. So his advice was sort of come to Melbourne and do my apprenticeship down there. And I started out in cafes, the Continental Cafe and Mario's Cafe on Brunswick Street, with a bit of institutions back in the 90s. So that's sort of where I cut my teeth at the start, and got involved in commercial kitchens. And on John's advice, he was sort of like, you always need to be looking to better yourself, especially during your apprenticeship. So I was lucky enough to get a job with the Grossies when they first opened Grossi Florentino on Burke Street. Yeah. So I sort of went into that kitchen pretty raw, to be honest. I was still only a kid, 19 years old, out of Ballarat, basic knowledge on food, which was, cafes in Melbourne. But I wanted to try and extend myself. I wanted to experience something that was at a higher level. So the Grossies were good enough to take me on, and they were a real influence on me. Guy and Chris Rodriguez, his head chef, they were fantastic. They took me under their wing, but also, chefs that were in that kitchen, guys like Frank Camora. I worked under Frank for a year and a half at Florentino. So some amazing experienced chefs that have obviously gone on to do wonderful things that I sort of got to learn from and be taught by. It was fantastic.
Are there any dishes from that period of time that have sat with you since then?
Oh, look, the Grossies, the Abbacchio alla Romana, the Abbacchio alla Romana is still something that I use today in my career as a charcutier as well. And I reluctantly call myself a charcutier because I don't have a French qualification, but I've been going at this for long enough now. But the Abbacchio alla Romana was my first whole carcass butchery experience, and how to break down these, suckling lambs, these milk-fed lambs. When I first, when Frank Camorra basically showed me how to do it and said, "Right, you're doing the next one," I was like, "Shit, this is this is intense." He handed over a butcher's knife and a cleaver and said, "Now you do it." And that was a great experience on how to concentrate with a carcass and what you need to extract from the whole body of an animal.
Where did you go from there? You ended up cooking in London as well long before you became known for what you do now.
Yeah, it's sort of cooking took me overseas. A lot of chefs that I was working with and around, it was a fairly typical thing that people were heading off to London and doing their stint in London. I actually did it twice. I went over once in 2001 and then went back again in 2003 for another 3 years. So I loved it so much that I had two cracks at it. But I went over and I worked in sort of. I got a really broad sweep of the hospitality industry. If I'm being honest, I've gone from sort of cafes in Melbourne to a high-end restaurant, Italian restaurant in Melbourne. Landed in London, got a job in a 5-star hotel, and then found myself working for catering companies at the top end of Canary Wharf, cooking for the elite, I suppose, and that was under Rue Fine Dining. So Albert Rue had sort of an arm of contract catering, and then I found myself in a club in Mayfair, working in a club in Mayfair, which was long hours, hard work. And my first head chef's job when I was in England was at a wine merchant at Berry Brothers and Rudd, which is a famous old wine merchant for fine wine around the world. And that was a great experience for me to actually develop my palate. I sort of worked day in and day out with masters of wine, matching food and wine to some of the best wines around the world. It was, I was there for 12 months, and someone of my pay level, age and experience had no business drinking the sort of wines that I got to try every single day. First growth Bordeaux, Grand Cru, Premier Cru Burgundy. It was incredible. A 20-something-year-old bloke from Ballarat had an opinion on Grange and the different vintages of it. It's just not supposed to happen, But I was very, very lucky to sort of learn from these guys about how they, when they drink wine and they taste wine, how they break it down, pull it apart, and taste the nuances in the wine. And I started to do that with food. I started to really extract flavour and think about flavour in a way that I probably never had before.
What led you to leave the industry? You'd carved out a career and loved cooking, but you ended up putting the apron down and picking up a different one. Can you tell us about that period of time?
Yeah, so I came back from the UK to Melbourne, and I worked in a number of jobs, running kitchens across Melbourne. And I think as a chef, as you sort of get 10 years plus experience, you start to figure out what the long-term goal starts to look like. And I think, some guys, they love pastry or baking, and, it ultimately leads them to opening a patisserie or a bakery, or, some sort of find that fine dining path and they have that aspiration of one hat, two hat, three hat. For me, every time I made something in a kitchen that was, charcuterie, salumi, that's what gave me the most joy. And I always talk about, the best moment about what I get to do day in and day out is that first cut when I get to open up a capicola and see the cross section of something that's been maturing for 3 months, and then we get to touch, feel, smell it. It's it's still, I still get that feeling, that that excitement out of that cut, and as long as that lasts, I'll feel lucky within my job.
You mentioned a little earlier that you don't have a French or Italian or Spanish heritage, but those cultures, charcuterie and small goods is integral to their food. Can you tell us about the exploration that you had in France and the Basque Country to absorb knowledge for what you do?
Yeah, well, I mean, it was a realization, I suppose, after working as a chef and making charcuterie and salumi on an amateur level, in a commercial kitchen. And like you've just said, I didn't come out of making these products as a kid growing up and having salami days with family. And this accent comes from living in Western Victoria for most of your life. I can't get rid of it. It is what it is. Um, it's but I've learned to love and embrace it. So I knew that I was transitioning from one industry into an industry that I had some knowledge of, but not a broad enough knowledge of. And I wanted some real experience of making it outside of what I could, make within a kitchen, make with other people around me, and deduce from books and things like that. Obviously, is where it all starts. So locally, I was sort of doing salumi days here, and if there was a day in a kitchen somewhere where they were making salamis or charcuterie, I was there. But ultimately, I wanted to go to France, Spain, or Italy to find out, to go to the source. Essentially, these are products that they've been making for generations, and I wanted to sort of see that, feel that, and experience it. I'm waffling, I'm sorry, but it sort of led me to the point where I scoured and scoured, and I found an expat American who was living in the southwest of France by the name of Kate Hill. And she had a relationship with a family of charcutiers, the Chapellards in Gascony. And so they were an on-farm charcuterie. They had the charcuterie set up next to the old chateau. They grew everything they fed to the pigs on farm, and then they produce the charcuterie and sell everything at local markets. So it was all retail. They weren't supplying restaurants or food service. So I heard this and I was like, okay, I need to see that. That's what I want. I want to see what it is to take an animal from a French paddock, butcher on site, and then go to market. That was something that I wanted to see, touch, feel myself.
What did you take away from the experience and the journey over there? What were the sort of things that you sort of took home with you?
Well, I went there with work on mind. So any opportunity I could take to spend more time on charcuterie, making charcuterie, I took it, to the point where I was actually staying with Dominic and Christiane. So that Dominic was the older brother. He's one of four brothers in the Chapelard family, and they all had their own role on the farm. So one sort of looked after the farming, essentially. They all sort of did the markets, but Dominic ran the charcuterie. And I was lucky enough to stay with them a few nights, and that basically meant it gave me the opportunity to get up at 3 a.m, go down to the abattoir with the pigs for slaughter, because I wanted to see the whole process, from start to finish. So you'd go to the abs at 4 a.m. The pigs would be processed. You'd collect the blood, take it back so that you made the boudin noir straight away, so that you were using it as fresh as possible. It didn't always play in my favour. One time when I was at the abattoir, they gave me the pig stomachs to clean, and I vow and declare never to have to do that again, because that is a disgusting job. If anyone's ever done it, they'll know what I mean. So it doesn't always work in your favour, but I'm better for the experience, that's for sure.
You came back to Australia with ideas, and you went back to your hometown. Tell us about the beginnings of Salt Kitchen and how you got that started.
So Salt Kitchen was always an idea before before it actually landed as, oh, we're going to do this in Ballarat, back in my hometown, it kind of organically happened. I had a relationship in commercial kitchens with Western Plains Pork and Judy Crow in particular. Um, and before I left, I sat down with Judy and sort of said, look, I'm going over to France I want to upskill myself. I want to learn more about how to make these products. But when I come home, I need a pig farmer that is receptive to what I've got to say when I come back, and listen to some ideas that I've got. Are you up for it? And she was really excited, and she convinced Tim, her husband, to go along for the ride, which is great. But I came back to Australia, and I suppose it's a bit of the stars align, where Western Plains Pork are literally 30 minutes from our doorstep here at Salt Kitchen, in Ballarat. So they're a local pig farmer that had the right breeding of pig as well. One thing I learnt when I was in Gascony, but also I did a bit of time down in the Basque Country. They use large white cross pigs. Duroc, a lot of Duroc breeding through their pigs as well, and there was a nice lineup there with French pigs and what was being produced at Western Plains Pork. But one of the main things that I brought back was, Australia, we're a British market. We produce pigs, and they get slaughtered traditionally, and they're hanging on a butcher's hook at around that 50 kilo mark dress weight. The ones I was working with in France, charcuterie pigs, they're 150 kilos plus on the hook. So, these are big pigs. So we had to come back and figure out a way that we were going to be able to get pigs that could be grown out, to try and mimic the muscle structure, fat content, and that level of pig that you need to make the products that I wanted to make, coming back.
Well, tell us a bit more about that. What's so important about having a pig of that size and that structure for charcuterie?
Well, fat content is crucial. We all eat charcuterie and marvel at, jamon and prosciutto di Parma, prosciutto San Daniele, Bayonne ham, about how delicious and silky, velvety the fat is. It's something else, and you can't get that out of a pig that hasn't had a life in the paddock, that has been able to develop its muscles, lay enough fat on, and ultimately become a size. And the thing is with the muscles as well, the older the pig gets, the more they tend to dry out. So the muscles tend to become drier. And obviously, if you're making something like pancetta or capicola, what are you trying to do? You're trying to remove moisture to try and dry cure it slowly. So you got a head start with a larger pig, but also that level of marbling and muscle structure, depth of colour comes with an older pig.
Wow. And Western Plains, did you work with them closely to create a pig just for you?
Yeah, we did. So I came back, had a meeting at the farm with Judy and Tim, and sort of showed them. I took photos everywhere I went when I was in France, obviously, and Tim was quite gobsmacked at how similar these French pigs were to the ones that he had grown in his paddock out here in Western Victoria. And we sort of put together a plan. I said to them, they need to be bigger guys. They need to grow out. So we had numerous meetings with animal nutritionists and things like that about feed. I had feed sheets that I bought back, that we had a bit of a look at and all that sort of stuff. And they were good enough to actually put together or put aside a parcel of land out there where they could start growing out pigs for Salt Kitchen Charcuterie. And in the beginning it was small because this business started with me wandering around in here on my own, probably singing to myself most days, and cutting up 2 pigs a week, a couple of 100 kilos. And now we're sort of processing 16 to 18 a week, 2 ton plus. So it's sort of grown from that in the space of 4.5 to 5 years. And yeah, the faith that they showed in me to, put together a parcel of land out there and manage pigs in a way that I was needing them to be done, I'm forever grateful to them, and it's been a great relationship that I'm really pleased it's ongoing today.
Well, once you had that pig lined up and the one that you need for the best charcuterie, what are some of the hurdles or elements required in making charcuterie? It's quite a challenging thing because you might not know what the end product is until months later.
Well, that was a scary bit at the start, Anthony. I can tell you, it's when you start laying down product, and not knowing, your first batch of something, not knowing what it's going to be like until sort of 2.5 to 3 months later. It's a bit daunting, but you know, my experience overseas, my experience in kitchens, even working with the Grossies, that we made a lot of stuff there. They still do salumi days to this day with the Grossies. I could draw on knowledge that I had of how to make the product, and I knew what I needed to do in terms of my skill set was good enough to actually produce the product. The most daunting part was regulations. Especially here in Victoria, we've got a really strict set of regulations that we have to follow to produce small goods. And they're the rules. The rules are the rules. But getting your head around documents that are pages and pages long about bacterias and everything that it takes to make a food safe product in the meat industry was really, really daunting at the beginning, and something that I've had to sort of learn and evolve as time's gone on.
Can you pick one of your star products and take us from sort of animal to finished product? What does it take to make great charcuterie?
Well, I mean, one of my favourites is Capicola. I've always loved Capicola. I think, I've always got it in my fridge. I'm always eating Capicola, and my belly will tell you that it's bigger than it used to be. And Capicola is a testament really to what we're trying to do with a larger pig. So it's that Scotch muscle, the back of the head, top of the rib, essentially. That if you think about what a pig does in the paddock, they forage all day. They dig up the paddocks out there at Western Plains. Like anyone that's ever been out there, it looks like the moon sometimes. It's just been completely dug up and turned over, and then they move them to the next paddock and away they go again. And the thing is, with digging up paddocks, the muscle that they're using the most is that neck muscle, from the Capicola. Now, a pig that probably only gets the opportunity to do it for a number of months of its life won't develop what we're after, whereas one that's been, grown out to the size and weight that we're after. So you, first and foremost, like anything any cook will ever tell you, it's about the product. You start with something that is premium, that is amazing, that you cut into with your knife and you marvel at, and I genuinely do with neck muscles, with Capicola. That spider web of fat that goes through those muscles, it is beautiful. I think it's stunning, and that is a perfect example of what we're trying to do here. Those bigger muscles that are going to lose a large percentage of their weight as it contracts and loses that over a period of maturation, intensifies flavour, and the fat's just like silk, as I said before. So it's the Capicola is a product that is all about these pigs that we're getting.
We're heading towards Christmas, and Christmas hams are always in just about every household in Australia. But there's, vast differences between a good ham and a great ham. Can you tell us what it takes to make a great leg ham?
Yeah, well, ham's been an evolution for me, like all my products have. Like, I started out wanting to use no additional preservatives in my ham and bacon, no nitrites. And I found out pretty quickly that was going to be really hard for people to receive with ham in particular. We still make nitrite-free bacon, I'm pleased to say. But nitrite-free ham was really hard for a small producer that wasn't doing markets to explain why it wasn't holding a bright pink colour every time someone would get the product. So we sort of evolved, but I've always wanted to not use a pre-made mix with the ham that we make. We make our own tea for the injection that goes into the ham, for our brine that goes into the ham, of different spices and aromats that we put into it. But I've learned over time that there's so much technical knowledge that I've attained in the last 5 years about making hams, to make sure it's not too dry, to make sure that the cook time's right, to get the reddening right at the start of cook. Smokes like salt and pepper. You add too much of it, it's like, oh, it's too much. If you don't add enough, where is it? It's been a real it's been a test over time, and we've added equipment to this facility over the space of 5 years to improve those processes along the way. But I'm really grateful for having to do it on a really basic level at the start, because you learn your product, you understand your product, how much time takes it too far to make it too dry, as an example.
Mick, what is it that you love the most about what you do?
Well, as I mentioned before, obviously that first cut, when you actually get to see the cross section of what you've just produced, and all that long and hard work sort of comes to fruition. But also, I suppose the best part about making this sort of product is that I love to eat it. And sitting down with my colleagues here who, are as passionate about charcuterie as I am, we sort of get to taste these products day in and day out, week in and week out, and assess, and you get a really good feel and understanding for your product, how to improve it, what worked, what doesn't work when you're in the testing phase as well. So I love that. I love that part of it where, that's the creative part. We're in a kitchen, I suppose, in a commercial kitchen, you're doing that day in and day out, coming up with new dishes. Here it's more of a weekly or a monthly thing when you're developing something.
This charcuterie journey that you've been on, has there been any unexpected sort of joys or surprises along the way?
I suppose it's been a surprise, the goodwill of people that I still work with now, and the ones that I've worked with in the past. I started out this business targeting restaurants as my customer, and whilst I was confident and sure that I could make a good product, it still does humble me and surprise me that people supported it. I've got customers still that I've had from day one, and have sort of seen the full evolution of our product list, and how we've evolved the business and sort of supported us along the way. And that's just a great feeling to sort of have people that I know and respect that have followed me and continue to support me all the way.
We briefly touched on hams and Christmas hams. Is there any sort of tips you can give for that period of time when, in regards to storage and use of ham over that sort of festive season?
Yeah, well, a good ham bag is, I think, a great thing, especially if you're buying a larger ham on the bone. I eat ham right into mid-January, I think, across the Christmas period, because it's always in the fridge. So a good ham bag. Make sure you keep it nice and damp and moist to protect the ham. And also, when you take that skin off the top of the ham, keep that as an additional protective layer to sit on top of the cut side of your ham. And the only other one I would say is, with glazing, it looks amazing, I think, to stud a ham with cloves. I think they look incredible and fantastic, but a whole clove is not always the most pleasant thing to eat. I'm one for sort of blending the clove up and actually mixing it through your glaze and basting it on top of your ham, rather than studding it if you don't need that visual appeal at the Christmas table.
Well, that's a pretty good tip, but I've got to ask you, do you prefer to bake your ham, or do you prefer to have it in the fridge to slice for a couple of weeks?
It changes every year, if I'm being honest. Some years I feel inspired to bake and glaze, and then other years you just want the simplicity of just good slicing ham in the fridge. I don't have a preference either way, and I love both.
Oh, well answered.
Thank you.
Well, Mick, we've loved having a chat with you on the Crackling. Christmas is coming pretty soon, and no doubt people will be knocking on your door for some hams. Keep in touch. It's been great chatting. We'll talk again soon.
Appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
This is The Crackling, a Deep in the Weeds production in partnership with PorkStar. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Stay tuned as we catch up with some of Australia's best chefs and pork producers to discover what makes Australian pork so special.